Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to Higher Awards Speaker Series. During these speaker series, we get to know the stories of nonprofits and religious leaders and the work of their amazing organizations. Before beginning our conversation today, we just want to briefly introduce Higher Awards and our guest speaker. So Higher Awards is a startup based in Silicon Valley that gives community-based organizations the ability to provide members with a credit card branded with the organization's logo. Essentially, each time members use the card, they support the organization financially because 2% of the members' daily transactions go directly towards the organization. My name is Srijoni, I go by Shri, and I'm a business intern for Higher Awards this summer.
My name is Mihir Nair, and I'm also a business intern along with Shri this summer. Both of us will be co-hosts for this conversation. And finally, we just want to extend a warm welcome to our guest speaker today, Ms. Kevia Hummel. Last but not least, we will have a short question and answer session at the end. So feel free to drop your questions or any other insights you have about this conversation into our Facebook Live or right here on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mihir. So just to get started, Kevia Hummel, we know that Ms. Hummel is the Civic Engagement Program Director of the National Civic League. And first of all, as Mihir said, welcome, Kieva. Just to start off, Higher Awards is all about empowering those who've already dedicated themselves to others and sharing their stories. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and the work for the National Civic League?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for inviting me here. I want to say a special thank you to Mihir and Shri for organizing this conversation. Now, like she had mentioned, I'm the Civic Engagement Program Director. I am currently located in Denver in the Mile High City, but I am born and raised in the California Bay Area. The National Civic League, a little bit about our organization is we've been around for 125 years. We're a nonprofit that aims to advance civic engagement to create equitable and inclusive and thriving communities. Our primary programs are in three major areas, including community assistance civic engagement programs, awards and events, and research and publications. We offer direct community assistance on things such as involving the community to develop strategic plans for cities, city charters, as well as any sort of community engagement efforts. We're also known for our flagship program, the All-America City Awards, through which we recognize 10 communities every year as All-America Cities. And these are going to be communities that are role modeling and showcasing inclusive civic engagement work. And each year we focus on a specific theme, generally around health and/or well-being. And also equity is always a big part of this. Lastly, we produce resources and publications. And this includes our quarterly journal. We call it the National Civic Review, which has been around for many decades. And we also have engagement resources such as the Civic Index, which is a tool that can be used to measure the level of inclusive and equitable civic engagement happening within communities. That's a little brief background about the League and a little bit about myself.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's so refreshing to hear about a national nonprofit that's truly having an impact pretty much everywhere across the US, and especially with civic engagement. That is such an important topic. And I believe, it's going to be very important for the future. As our country, we are founded on principles of democracy and engaging with local politics, engaging in discussions, and celebrating that. So it's great to hear that you're not only inspiring this, we're also celebrating all efforts geared towards civic engagement. So thank you for sharing that. And as the current executive Civic Engagement Program Director of the National Civic League, how has your leadership experience been shaped by the current climates, both in relation to COVID-19 and then obviously in the wake of George Floyd's death and racial injustice across America?
That's a great question. I think that these times offer us a very unique and challenging opportunity, having to deal with dual pandemics, both the pandemic of the coronavirus, as well as this yet another uprising for racial justice, right? And so I have to say, for me personally, the way that my leadership style has been impacted by these has been a renewed opportunity for flexibility, as well as a recognition of honestly what's happening in my own body, because that's going to impact how I move forward and interact with everyone else, right? And so requiring to have much more expansive compassion and understanding, while both of these pandemics do impact us each very differently, depending on our identities and the opportunities that we have in this world. No matter how you cut it, it is going to be hard on everyone. We're all having to deal with a lot of ambiguity. And I also believe and see that this is not the same for every person. And I think that there needs to be a lot of humility taken with every person, especially if you come from dominant identities, right? Especially if you're not privy to a personal experience. So recognizing that you don't have that access to experience and knowledge, and using that to basically humble down. And then also still keep going and still stay in it. So it's finding that flexibility of working with our human spirits while also, you know, keeping things moving forward, at least hopefully forward.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think I completely resonate with what you were saying about like flexibility, and these times really teaching us a lot about that, and like personal flexibility, and just like how our community and our society is responding to all the events at the moment. And I think it's so great that the National Civic League is sharing important messages of equity, humility, and compassion at this like important time. And I know that when I was like reading up about, because I know you mentioned that the organization has been around for like over 100 years, which is just so impressive in itself. But when I was like reading up on your website, I read this this quote that like really like stood by me, and it was that like the health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of function performed by private citizens. And I know that this is like an idea that the National Civic League tries to embody as well. And yeah, like how should we as citizens and active individuals of the society work to ensure that we are contributing to the best form of our community, to like ensure that our community is like at the best form that it can be? And more particularly, how is the National Civic League working to create a community which has inclusive civic engagement, as you like mentioned before?
Oh, I love that. And I appreciate that you pulled out that quote specifically. Well, let me first off start that, you know, I can't say what's right for a person individually and how they want to participate in their community and in their democracy. And, you know, I can't even say that on a structural level for an engagement process when you go into a community. Because, you know, as an example, the Civic League, because we do promote equity, it is so important to name that, right? And to name what that looks like. And the recognition that oftentimes we're going to be working with communities with whom, you know, maybe this is our first time meeting, you know, and maybe we are not part of that community. And it's really vital to recognize that. And then when you're working with a community, right, you can't just come in and be like, this is how we're going to do things because this is what we found to work in some places. I think it's great to go in with ideas, right? And then those have to be co-created and shaped by the community themselves. So if anything, I'm just more of a soundboarding and, hey, here's some cool processes and we found that these are equitable. And then the community themselves helps to really shape that. And so that's, you know, both the you know, community engagement on this process or structure level. But what it comes down to is we don't know always what that looks like for each person. And so I think each person has to recognize their own skills and values and what they can bring to the table and then leverage that. You know, these are my personal views as I move forward in this next statement. You know, we do live in a society that was intentionally created to not necessarily foster our human spirits. And it's really hard to like leverage our spirit, which is really our talent, our skills, and what we bring to our democracy and bring to our communities, right? And so it's really, really important that we put in some work to also touch in with our own human spirits, because then we can really unleash those, right? And that's really where the power is, because we all have different skills, we all have different bodies that function different ways. So we just got to find out what fits, and then try as best that we can to stay tapped in I know all of these things are so phenomenally overwhelming, and you know, they can bring a lot of hardship and can really dispirit us and make it really hard just to honestly sometimes get out of bed every day. And I think it's important to speak to that because that's really human. And so it's really like, how do we maintain touch with our humanity and then leverage and bring in our humanity when we're interacting with each other? And then I think that will inherently reveal where each person can kind of tap in.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the nose there, that like with individuals in society, we first have to understand ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses in order to affect positive change in the community. And you know, as a nonprofit that works in different communities across the country, I think you're completely right in stating that the first step of being an effective change maker is always to understand the needs and wants of the community, to actually listen to the community, and then to actively collaborate with them. But those first steps of having the difficult conversations, being vulnerable, discussing, and then taking action, I think that is so, so vital. And it's so great to hear how the National Civic League's been doing this for a century, and they're successfully uplifting people's voices and uplifting the human spirit. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you know, currently, yeah, of course, feel free to chime in.
Is that okay? Yeah, just one other thing. Thank you so much for sharing that, and that inspired me to add additional thing that I didn't explicitly say, and you encouraged me to have it come into my brain again. And this is my soapbox gospel. It's all about relationships, you know, and I really, really believe that when it comes down to it, it's both the relationship we have with ourselves, right? But also the relationship we have with each other, because it's really, really hard to disregard someone's feelings, disregard someone's experience. You know, for example, if someone is like, I don't experience racism, so thus it cannot exist. Well, that's not necessarily a truth, right? Because just because you don't personally experience something doesn't mean it's not a reality. But if you're in a relationship with someone, you really get to understand not just their stories, but their spirit and how this world impacts them and those feelings. And that relationship is really the foundation of true change. And that's another point I wanted to add. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for chiming in. You know, here at Higher Words, we are about having these conversations, and I'm glad that you chimed in when you did, because I think you're right. Those relationships that you foster in your local community are what make the difference. That's where you hear the inspirational stories. That's where you hear other people uplifting others in their community. And that's where you hear about actually making a tangible, positive difference in the long run. So thank you so much again. And you know, just going off of that, the National Civic League has a variety of initiatives going on. I think you touched on them briefly at the beginning of this conversation. So you mentioned you have this like award ceremony to recognize civic engagement. You also have this journal that you're writing. You have resources out there for other people, and then you have several other programs going on across local communities, including these national conferences. So through all your amazing work with the National Civic League, can you share like one particularly meaningful story or moment or interaction or relationship that you've fostered or been a part of that's been really meaningful?
That's a really great question. So many. I think what's really incredible and powerful about work involving democratic process, and that's with a lowercase d, not necessarily capitalized D, is that you're connecting with people. And so there's so many opportunities every single day. You know, I have to say one that kind of stuck out to me, and it might be slightly dated, but this is from a project I had done in the fall time. And I think that it also highlights community engagement, civic engagement work in general, is just that phenomenon of, I've been working with a vulnerable population that has traditionally been disenfranchised and not brought to the table. Or the reality is, we really want to be bringing the table to the people, right? We want to co-create the table with the people. And so as we're co-creating this table with the people for this particular civic assistance project that we are working with, you know, it was just so many opportunities just to have these really heart-to-heart conversations of, hey, this is my experience and this is how I want my city to look like, and this is really how my experience has been. And just having these opportunities, you know, I'm not wanting to share too many personal details or anything of that nature, but just having those really human opportunities to hold space for, hey, what is coming up? And also creating processes and civic engagement efforts that are truly helping to honestly get out of the way and create space for people to tap in with their own government. Because we want to be really intentional, especially with civic engagement, to not be gatekeepers, you know, meaning like preventing people from accessing certain things unless we give permission, or to helicopter into a community, which is like just dropping in, even if you're not part of it, and just pretending like you know what time it is and you don't. So it's really an immensely valuable experience for me to be present with a community, to hear and hold space for what's coming up, and to co-create these designs on how they want their city to look like, for example. So I think just having those experiences, that's an example of something that's been really, truly touching for me. And it's very common, you know, and anytime you listen to someone, a lot of folks just want to be heard. You know, in this particular experience, it was with a community that oftentimes is not heard or listened to explicitly. And so you cannot create a democracy, a true lowercase d democracy, unless every single person is invited to the table and made sure at the table. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was like exactly what I was thinking as well. I feel like you just like stole the words of like my thoughts. But I think you're so right about like you can't really create a democracy if you don't represent everybody, and like if not everyone's at the table. That's so right. And I'm so glad that like people like you and like the National Civic League is doing something about this and is like actively working to achieve a future in which this is possible for everybody, and that's so great. And yeah, and like as you were saying, it's like the communications between different people within a local community that makes like all the difference. And in the end, it's like people voicing their opinions and speaking up for what they see is like fit, which makes a huge impact in the community. And yeah, like that's so great. And like Higher Wards as well is like we're all about like empowering such people and like ensuring that there are these types of conversations and that there is like communication as well. And I guess the way that we do it is like different because we're trying to financially empower those who already serve and give back to others. And quite notably, the National Civic League has grown their operations and impact to communities in literally every corner of the United States, while also forming some amazing partnerships with large corporations such as like Southwest Airlines and Kaiser Permanente. Yeah, and I was just wondering, like, as someone who's like kind of overseeing a lot of these things, like, what do you think are some of the financial challenges that you see in the future as you continue to sustain such large-scale operations? And how do you plan to overcome such challenges that might come up?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, off the top of my head, and I'll also preface that I don't run the financial operations part. I don't do too much development. But what I am aware of is that funding is always a challenge, right? And oftentimes the league, for at least our civic assistance programs, well, actually this also applies for, you know, our conference as well. We're having to navigate really, you know, honestly sensitive and really challenging environments for cities and for communities. You know, people are struggling to keep roofs over their head, to keep food in their stomachs, you know, to keep from getting coronavirus and so many more things, right? So there's a lot going on for everyone. And so the reality is funding is not going to be the same. Cities aren't going to be able to prioritize these things in quite the same way. And I think that, again, it does kind of loop back to that being really flexible because, you know, there's a lot of ambiguity in general, which is exacerbated by some opportunities for improved leadership at some federal levels. So, I think that we all just kind of have to be patient and recognize that the funding, though, is just a very different landscape than it used to be. And I know you've heard that from a lot, so I don't think I'm offering anything new in that area, but.
Yeah, thank you.
And then do you have a second part of the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think the second part was like, I guess it was just kind of like with the funding, and it was just like, how do you like plan to overcome like challenges that might come up with these like large scale operations or like going forward? But I feel like you kind of answered that like with it as well.
Well, one thing I do want to add, and this is something that the League has already been doing, so it's not really new for these times, but it is even more important now, is a big part of, especially the civic assistance programs, is working with other organizations who are more connected to specific communities that we're trying to reach, right? As a white woman, I'm not necessarily going to be able to connect with the Latinx community at the same depth that someone who is of Latinx identity can. And so it's really important for us to build relationships with folks who are already part of those communities, and to make sure that they are continuing to be engaged in the process, not just to use their expertise and network, but you are part of this experience. Can I add a little something as well that I just want to really appreciate about Higher Rewards? These are such challenging times, and especially for strappy little nonprofits or community-based organizations, it's so especially vital to have financial support and to have an organization that is willing to work with them in order to, meet their goals. And so I think that especially in this society, which has very clear structures of power and privilege, Higher Rewards has a really unique opportunity to kind of help level that playing field. And so I just want to express my gratitude for the work that you do. And, these are really financially challenging times for individuals and organizations alike. And so, you are really being of service to help really, elevate folks who are doing good work, and to like make that possible, and to unleash and like catalyze that, what we really need in this world. So I just wanted to say thank you also for the work that you all do.
Yeah, and we want to reciprocate that thank you right back at you, because here at Higher Rewards, we really are all about putting all competition aside with other credit cards. We're really about empowering those who already dedicate themselves to others, and that is you. You are the complete embodiment of that, and it's just so refreshing, again, to hear all these stories about nonprofits, but in particular also here right now today to hear about the National Civic League, truly uplifting voices, empowering those who already want to make their community, their local politics, their entire livelihoods better for the future and the next generation. So thank you so much. And you mentioned, just to go back really briefly, you mentioned at the beginning of this response that you felt like your response wasn't like very unique, but we wanted to say that every nonprofit's response is unique. We know that it is a common challenge, and that's why we are driven by this financial empowerment, because we know that finances are often a taboo topic with nonprofits, and we want to really bring that into the limelight. So thank you so much. Do you want to add anything? Yeah, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, one additional thing I wanted to add for yourselves as well as your network. National Civic League has a bunch of free resources that we'd like to offer, one of which is the All America Cities Conversation Toolkit. Basically, it's a conversation guide that folks can use. We also offer the National Civic Review now. It's available for anyone who'd like to. You just have to hit me up and or email me, and I'll give you an access code if you'd like to receive that. And that's going to be our publication around civic engagement work. And finally, our All America Cities conference and event is happening August 17th through the 19th. And this is going to be an opportunity to see 10 cities across the U.S. We're going to award 10 cities across the U.S. But it's a great opportunity to see cool civic engagement work that's happening, especially to promote equity in cities. And that's a free, we're going to be simulcasting it on Facebook. So again, that'll be on the National Civic League site as well. So I just want to offer those resources for your network and for yourself as well.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Thank you. We are really all about that mutual empowerment and that mutual gratification. So there's always two sides of the coin. And now we're just gonna like transition over to a short question and answer session. So we're just gonna open it up to our audience here on Zoom and on Facebook Live if they want to ask you any questions. So I'll just ask you use the hand raising button on Zoom or just comment on Facebook Live if you have any question. Okay, so we have a question from Jacob Hipp. So Jacob, feel free to come on live and ask your question.
Okay, hey Kieva, how are you doing today?
Doing great, thanks.
Excellent.
Jacob.
Hey, so for people that want to get involved with civic engagement and racial equity in their local community, what's the kind of easy entry point to start getting involved in supporting their hometown, or is there, I'm sure there's a multitude of things that you can do, but what would be an example of like a kind of an easy entry point to get involved?
Yeah, so I think there's a few possibilities here. I would be remiss to not include checking out our website, naturalcivicleague.org. There's a lot of resources. As I mentioned, we've been around for 125 years. Absolutely, that looked a lot different when we first started than when we have the last few decades, and still we have a great repository of information there. So that's for the folks that like to get into some cool data. It's also a network of cities and individuals and organizations that are really passionate about civic engagement, but specifically to improve equity within communities. There is a way to do engagement that is not promoting equity, and that is not what we like to do. So we have the Civic Index. I think I mentioned it before, and it's a free tool as well on our website. And this offers kind of 7 categories within a community where you can really assess and analyze what does the engagement look like in those realms and how can it be done better. And if I can also plug, so I'm National Civic League is a partner organization with another nonprofit called the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, ncdd.org. Now, this is a network and hub of individuals and organizations that are doing work under this really wide umbrella of civic engagement and dialogue and deliberation. Now, it's a little bit of a wider wheelhouse than National Civic League, but it is also still a great resource and as well as a network for folks who just want to tap in. But I would also say, especially if you're going to do civic engagement work, you have to do your research and you have to recognize your privilege and where you're moving into this space. And you have to be mindful of how that's going to impact your community when you're moving into it, and recognize that the community that you're working with, they know best. We are experts of our own experience. And so we just got to get out of the way. That's really all it is.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I feel like it's completely like opened my eyes to like all of this that I didn't really know much about before. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And thank you to everyone who has tuned into our conversation today and or will be watching later. We'd once again like to thank Kieva for sharing her time with us, and we hope that the National Civic League's work inspires you to continue supporting your local community and being active about your efforts for civic engagement and ensuring that it's like active engagement as well. We appreciate you all for tuning in this afternoon and for asking Kieva such insightful questions. You can follow the work and find all of the resources and events that Kieva mentioned earlier of the National Civic League on their website at naturalcivicleague.org. And finally, Higher Words is all about sharing stories and empowering communities and individuals who have been dedicating their lives to others. And if you wish to learn more about Higher Words and the way that we financially empower community-focused organizations, please be sure to check out higherwords.com or follow us on social media at Higher Words. Yeah. So for now, we want to wish you all a safe and healthy weekend, and we hope to see you soon for another installment of our speaker series. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure to be here.